In Marvel Studios' Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, martial arts master Shang-Chi, played by Simu Liu, attempts to live a normal life in San Francisco. Despite this, he is pulled away from the mundane to confront the past he thought he left behind. This draws him into the web of the mysterious Ten Rings organization and his father, Wenwu.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Marvel Standom, and this week we are talking about Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. With me for all time and always, I have Den of Geek TV editor Katie Burt, and I have a couple of special guests this week. I have Bernard Boo, who is a member of the San Francisco Critics Circle and a frequent contributor to denofgeek.com, and I have Gene Ching, a 32nd generation disciple of the Shaolin Temple, the publisher of Kung Fu Magazine, and fortunately for the folks at Den of Geek, a contributor over here as well. I guess the first thing to start with here is the fact that Shang-Chi is probably the most obscure character that Marvel has given a headline slot to since Guardians of the Galaxy. And even though this is a character with like nearly a 50-year history in comics, I feel like the general public doesn't have a lot of familiarity with him and his world. So I'm just curious to see who here has like kind of some background with the character and what your thoughts are about the character's comic book history coming into this.
I definitely did research, when I found out that the movie was coming out. But, it was a completely obscure, total blind spot for me, which was an interesting position to come into this from.
Yeah, I'm the same as Bernard, which, has been the case even with some of the better known Marvel Comics characters, to be honest, because I haven't read a lot of the comics, even though I've been, watching the MCU since the beginning. But so it was kind of actually really nice to come into this without knowing a lot about the character, because I think at this point in the MCU, if you have been with it for, 10 plus years, it's a bit of a unique experience to have this kind of like novelty and freshness infused into the MCU. And I'm hoping we get more of that in Phase 4 and moving forward.
I remember the impact it had on the martial arts community. I wasn't a very big comics book guy, and so I didn't read it, but a lot of my friends were really fascinated by it. The original early stuff felt kind of derivative. I mean, it was obviously in the wake of Bruce Lee and had that sort of styling to it, and there were certainly some issues that we would consider racist at this point with his origin, with his original origin. So I'm really glad to see that they retooled it and reinvented the whole father story on a whole different level than how it was originally. But stylistically, it took a lot from Bruce Lee, at least the original comic, and also what was happening in Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest in the movies at the time. Because there was, we always think about Bruce Lee in the West because he had such impact on Hollywood. But at the same time, there was this huge movement coming from Hong Kong film that was just had a whole different culture of its own.
Sorry, Gene. I just realized I just saw your background. Are you sitting in a chair?
I am sitting in a chair, and these are standard Ten Rings issue. I should let you know.
Cool. It looks great.
These are called tiger hook swords. And I specialized in this weapon. I used to tournament with it.
Cool.
And I was so excited to see it be like the major weapon in the Ten Rings, because it's such a unique example of Chinese weaponry. That's one of the reasons why I specialized in it. So I've been working them again, and I relearned the form. It's just it got me re-inspired with these. I don't know how long I'll keep them on the chair here. I'm afraid I'm going to poke out my eye when I sit down. So I want to get one that glows. It'll sit next to my lightsaber.
You mentioned that the Shang-Chi comics, there are elements of them that are certainly problematic by today's standards, and I'm sure, a lot of this stuff was created with good intentions, I'm sure, but it was created by white American men in the 1970s, and who were really just kind of filtering things in that they had seen in the Kung Fu movie craze of the era. In recent comics, they've finally divorced him from the Fu Manchu stuff. Now, granted, in the comics, his origin is still different slightly from what we see in the film, in as much as it's like a different, criminal warlord, powerful man, not Wenwu. Personally, for me, as somebody who was not overly familiar with the character. Like, I had read some of the vintage stuff, and I was just kind of familiar with Shang-Chi from his appearances in like various Avengers comics, and like he'd guest star in like Spider-Man books every now and then. I was really impressed by just how accessible they made the character for this film and for new audiences. And do you feel that they kind of, do you feel it was successful in reinventing the character so completely?
Absolutely. I think coupling Simu Liu and Awkwafina was a brilliant choice. Their chemistry on screen is fantastic, and Awkwafina was just perfect into being sort of that witness, that sort of every man's like, who are you? Those lines were just perfect. She was nailing that really well, and I thought Simu Liu's character, I was skeptical about him, at first, and I started watching Kim's Convenience to kind of get a sense of who this guy was when they first announced it, because he didn't have a martial arts background. And then I totally fell in love with Kim's Convenience and wound up binging the entire show and was heartbroken when it got canceled because, it's just so brilliant at what it does. I was very happy with the way it all turned out.
So I'm a huge MCU fan. I'm like a 90s kid, and I was a comic book geek in the 90s. So it's this whole MCU thing is like a dream come true for me. I didn't think that superheroes would ever be taken seriously on the big screen. I guess more of a long shot for me was to have like an Asian American character in the lead of this huge movie, from the biggest studio in the world. This is amazing, but it also came with a lot of apprehension on my end because, I don't exactly trust Hollywood to, this sounds crazy, but I don't exactly trust Hollywood to portray us as human beings, like three-dimensional human beings with idiosyncrasies and flaws and strengths. So I kind of had my guard up going into this. There were so many moments in this film, which is just such a fun adventure. It's like every MCU movie, there's just like a standard of quality, and it definitely meets that standard of quality. And it takes you to so many surprising places. And the rhythm is so, kind of frenetic at times and then intimate at times. But there were a few moments throughout the film where what I was seeing on screen was just so compelling that I forgot that I was supposed to have my guard up. They earned my trust throughout the movie when they were driving that, was it a Jeep, like through the bamboo forest? And it was just so exhilarating and fun, and Ben Kingsley was making me laugh my ass off. I was like, oh, they're actually treating us seriously here. I forgot it was like an Asian movie. It's not. It's just a great movie that happens to star, Asian people. So I thought the movie was awesome. I had a great time.
Yeah, I love that Shang-Chi, or Sean's character, is also, he's very different from like a traditional stoic action hero, which he's presented as, or eventually you find out like he is a killer and he has the capacity to enact like very serious violence on people. But he's so vulnerable and goofy and kind, and he's not cynical. I think there's a lot of, or at least some like MCU protagonists who are very sarcastic, obviously, and that's part of their character. And I think that can be really fun, but to have characters like this who offset that with a kind of earnestness, especially in a movie like this where you have, Tony Leung playing this very hardened, sad antagonist in Wenwu. It balances that a lot. And obviously his relationship with Katie, played by Awkwafina, goes a long way to humanizing that, and having her as an audience surrogate, as you were saying, Gene, I think works really well.
I personally feel like this is the best Marvel Cinematic Universe villain, certainly since Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger in Black Panther. People are always like, oh, Marvel has a villain problem, like the villains, like the stakes are never high enough, or the villains aren't really anything to talk about, like unless it's Thanos. And then, of course, Killmonger like stole the movie in Black Panther. But Wenwu, and this is not just because of Tony Leung's incredible performance, but his motivations are so nuanced compared to a lot of what we see in these films. What does everybody have to say about him? Because I was just fascinated by this character.
Well, Tony Leung is a total A-list actor globally, and I think a lot of his films probably aren't recognized that well by the American audience, but internationally, I mean, he's Best Actor in Cannes for In the Mood of Love. He's been a 5-time winner of the Hong Kong Film Awards, has done films with every great Chinese director, Hong Lee and Wong Kar-wai. He's done so many amazing projects. He is such a veteran actor. And, they range from like these incredibly poignant romances, these crazy bloody John Woo gangster films, and to these just goofy, ridiculous comedies. I mean, he's got an incredible range. I have so much respect for him as an actor, and it's just great to see him in a Hollywood role, because he really hasn't broken Hollywood despite of his international fame.
Yeah, I actually think I disagree with you, Mike, in the sense that I think a lot of why this villain works so well is because of Tony Leung. I do think, there is something there in the script to go off of, but I think, like, a villain turned, bad or vengeful because his, like, perfect wife died in a horrible way is a bit of a trope. I do think it's interesting that he was basically, like, a villain for most of his life, and he had this little brief respite where he, like, played DDR with his family. And then he goes back to that, and it's treated in that way as, like, that was kind of the, like, hiccup in his villain story. It wasn't, the other way around where he started as, like, some kind of hero or everyman and then became evil. He's someone I really admire because he was in one of the first, like, foreign language films I saw in Infernal Affairs. And, it's so good. And, just, like, watching all of his stuff, I had like a mini Wong Kar-wai marathon this past year in the lead up to watching Tony Leung in this, and he brings another level of gravitas to whatever he's in, even if that project is already amazing.
How about Tony Leung in that 80s flashback with that suit, with the big lapels?
And it's like rolled
the Miami Vice rolled
up
sleeves. Is there any guy handsomer than that guy in that scene?
No.
No, I think what's so brilliant about him as an actor, and he's demonstrated this time and time again, is as Katie alluded to, mentioned, there are lots of moments in the film where he's meant to look like a hard ass, right? Like he's meant to look like most intimidating guy on the planet, and he's convincing at it, which, like we're used to seeing, honestly, from like older male Asian actors. Like that's kind of a thing that we see a lot when we are portrayed on the big screen. But that DDR scene, the tender scenes that you see of him in those flashbacks, those are just as convincing as the moments when he's a hard ass. That's the brilliance of Tony Leung. Like he can really do it all kind of effortlessly.
While he's rarely referred to as Wenwu in the comics, this character is the Mandarin, who, of course, we met in Iron Man 3. This movie does a great job of kind of recontextualizing the events of Iron Man and Iron Man 3. But in the comics, Wenwu and the Mandarin are one and the same, and it is one of those kind of unfortunate racial stereotypes. And the comics did try and move the character away from that. I feel like starting in the 90s, they started kind of like they realized they needed to reinvent this guy a little bit. But still, there was only so much you could do with the name. And the rings themselves were actually like, rings on your fingers. And this movie just completely blew up all of the iconography associated with that character and created something much more nuanced. The movie still manages to not be dismissive of Iron Man 3, which itself is kind of like, a third rail for some people. I love Iron Man 3 personally, but like, I think it was really impressive how it's like, look, this all happened, this all mattered, but like just a handful of lines of well-delivered dialogue just changed the perspective of, of how you look at one of the highest grossing movies of all time. And I think that's really fascinating. Yeah,
to have those little moments, I think, went a long way to integrating this movie into, the larger franchise and universe.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of when Guardians of the Galaxy came out, and for a while there before, I don't know, I guess in Infinity War, the Guardians just kind of felt like a separate corner of the MCU, so you kind of got that sense of scope. So that when they did meet the Avengers, it was like a big deal. That first like kind of reveal trailer where they meet Thor, and he says, "Who are you guys?" I mean, that moment is everything. And I think the fact that Guardians was its own separate thing added to the gravity of that. Like, just felt like I was in it, man. I wasn't thinking about the ramifications of what's going on in this movie in relation to the larger story, which is good. I think I felt the same way in Black Panther as well.
I love the integration of Wong. Benedict Wong is one of my favorite actors, and you talk about a voice with gravitas, man. That guy could read the phone book, and it would sound amazing. And I love just the way he fit into this story, and the way that kind of maybe that's a leaping off point into Doctor Strange. I'm very excited about the potential there.
This is a big week for Benedict Wong because people are going to see just how wonderful he is in just a couple of minutes of screen time in this movie. And he steals the Spider-Man No Way Home trailer.
Don't cast that spell. It's too dangerous. Fine. I won't.
I think this is going to be Wong's year. I think this is a character that they really want to position as a fan favorite.
I hope so. He was fabulous in that Netflix Marco Polo series. If you had a chance to see that, and everything he's done, I've always just been dazzled by him. You know, he's just got such character, you know.
And something that we've talked about a lot on Marvel Standom is the idea that there seem to be two tracks to the MCU right now, right? There's the weird, magical, multiversal side of things, and then there's like kind of the more grounded, political, real-world stuff. So it's like you're either doing, Doctor Strange and WandaVision and Loki, or you are Black Widow and Falcon and the Winter Soldier and stuff like that. But Shang-Chi is the first of these projects that feels like it's part of both of these worlds. And I think that's really significant. And I think, at least for me, that tells me that they have a lot of faith in this character and his ability to kind of help unify the MCU going forward. What were your favorite kind of MCU connections in this?
I mean, for me, I think it falls more into that first track you were talking about. I didn't think there was as much, explicitly political storytelling that was happening here. But one of the parts of this movie that I wish that they had more time for, and I think has the most potential moving forward, is Shang-Chi's sister, Ji Ling. And I think seeing her... I was really upset that she didn't get a moment with Wenwu before he died. I thought that was really... I don't know. It was a missed opportunity for me. But I think, seeing that moment where she's moved back into her father's headquarters and kind of taken over, what's going to happen next for this character who I don't think is very clearly a hero or a villain. She's somewhere in the middle, and that's really interesting to me. Yeah,
she was a real unknown. Her background as an actress is very... It's like her first big project, and I tried to do some research on her, and there's like nothing. So I'm really curious.
Yeah. I was like, okay, you're just an MCU star now.
Yeah.
So what was cool for me about the post-credits scene it was Wong and Captain Marvel and Bruce, right? Mm-hmm. What was cool for me is I'm really used to seeing like when I do see Asians on the big screen, it's like in a movie with a bunch of other Asians. So maybe we're like leaders, but we're just kind of leading other Asians. That's kind of how we're portrayed. So for me, just to see those two actors, Awkwafina and Simu Liu, standing next to the Avengers was like such a cool moment for me. I actually teared up, because I feel like people who look like me just aren't ever. We're always just kind of like a tier or two below as far as the film industry, and we're never portrayed as formidable and leaders, which is disingenuous because we are leaders, in the real world. So to see Simu and Awkwafina standing with those two actors in this kind of movie that's what I'm most looking forward to as far as how they weave these characters into the larger story. Is just for me personally, just seeing this Asian American guy hanging out with the Avengers. Like, that's so cool. It's so cool. I teared up, man. It was a big deal for me.
What do you think was happening with the analysis they were doing of the rings? They say there's something, like it's summoning something, right? What does everybody think is happening there?
I think it's no big deal. Probably nothing's going to come of it.
Yeah, nothing. Marvel never pays off, right?
I have no idea.
Feels like deep Marvel Comics lore that I'm just, way beyond,
It was interesting to watch the most recent Eternals trailer after having watched this movie and having seen, the creatures they were fighting in the third act. Are those meant, Mike? Are those meant to be deviants? Are they the same sort of thing, or is that not related?
No, but I just wrote something down and underlined it on my notepad here. I just had an idea. So, oh God, you're all gonna be so sorry that we opened this can of worms now. So the premise of the Eternals in the comics when they were introduced is like those giants that you see, those giant robot-looking things, the Celestials. Those created life on Earth, and they're supposed to return periodically to kind of judge their creations and determine if like a planet is worth it to continue on. And that seems to be like that might be what's happening in Eternals. I wonder if the beacon that they refer to at the end, that's coming from those rings. I wonder if what it's beckoning to is possibly these Celestials, and the rings might have been made out of a remnant of ancient celestial technology, which I think would make some sense, and it would connect this more directly to that film. But now I can't even remember. With all the pandemic delays and everything else, I can't even remember anymore if Eternals was supposed to come out before Shang-Chi in the first place. So who knows?
I like that theory, though. It feels something like that.
We've gone this long without talking about the fights in this movie, and that's in part because I didn't want to just boil this down to being Marvel's martial arts movie. But the fights in this are pretty great. But Gene, you, I feel, are particularly well positioned to talk about some of the fight choreography in this movie. What did you think of the action scenes here?
It was very satisfying. I mean, this is not only a great Marvel movie, but it's a great kung fu movie. They really nailed what they were trying to do. They had an amazing team, which was really smart. Andy Chang, who did Into the Badlands and was one of the proteges of Jackie Chan. A lot of these guys were proteges of Jackie Chan, and of course the late Brad Allen, who was also one of Jackie's proteges. You can totally see, like in the scaffold fight on the high rise, that is it just reeks of that Jackie Chan style of choreography, and but done very. I got to hand it to Simu Liu. He did a really great job. And his stunt people. The one thing about Shang-Chi is he's not masked, so they can't CGI it. They can't. Netflix's Daredevil pulled off a lot of great fight scenes, but he was masked, so you could swap out the players really easily. Shang-Chi didn't have that advantage.
Is there any particular styles that you noticed people fighting in this movie, or was this just more of like kind of a general fight choreography?
It's pretty much a mosaic of styles. One of the things that does kind of stick out, I'm sure you noticed how it looked a little bit like Avatar the Airbender, particularly with Michelle Yeoh and Ta Lo doing that sort of windy thing. Avatar the Airbender was actually choreographed by this guy, one of my martial cousins, Sifu Kisu, and he built every airbender style on a specific martial art. And so the actual airbending style was a style called Bagwajang, which is what Michelle references the most when she's doing her choreography. Some of the kicks were straight out of Bagwajang. In terms of Shang-Chi, you can see some Wing Chun, you can see some Baji Chuan, but it's pretty general, I think that was actually kind of wise not to be too system bound, because that really wasn't the plot of this. One thing I definitely got to bring out though is the Easter eggs to Kung Fu Hustle, because you see the poster in the back. I think it's Simu's bedroom. You see the Kung Fu Hustle poster, and then the guy that teaches archery in Ta Lo, that's Yun Hua, and Yun Hua was the landlord in Kung Fu Hustle.
Did you have a favorite fight scene or fight moment, Gene?
I liked the scaffold fight. I liked its complexity. I liked the bus fight too. The two opening fights were really strong. Mm-hmm. Once you start getting into the power rings, that get that's superhero fights, right?
Yeah, it's
and,
less
and
interesting.
I love those too.
Yeah, yeah.
But from strictly a kung fu standpoint, I thought the first two were standout.
Bernard, how about you?
Oh man, the scaffold fight in Macau, I could not breathe. I don't think I breathed once through that entire sequence. Especially, I mean, there's a beautiful shot where Aquafina's dangling off of this beam that's kind of like threatening to break off the side of this building, and Sean is running to her rescue, and they sold me that that he was not going to probably make it to get to her, and I could not breathe during that scene. It was so good, and I felt Gene and we saw it in the theater, and there was an audience. It definitely wasn't at capacity, but there were a lot of people there, and to just when there's a moment that's so cinematic and enthralling that you can kind of feel the theater move, like you can feel people kind of moving around in their seats. I could totally feel that during that scene. I love that scene. I can't wait to see it.
Absolutely, and that was a press-only screener, so you're talking about people who watch movies. So I think we were all glued at that.
Where does everybody feel this movie? This is the third kind of martial arts blockbuster that's come out this year. Unfortunately, all of them were hobbled by COVID, but we had Mortal Kombat, we had Snake Eyes, and we had Shang-Chi, and all of them tried to do very different things. How do you think Shang-Chi stacks up against those movies, both just overall and in terms of also in terms of its fight choreography and things like that?
I mean, ironically, this to me was the most engaging one, and both Snake Eyes and Mortal Kombat had a much stronger cast in terms of martial talent. I mean, Mortal Kombat was stacked in terms of how many great martial arts actors they had, and Snake Eyes too. I mean, there's a whole thing with choreography in that fight choreography has to maintain that suspense, right? It has to move the story along, and it has to kind of tell the story in the fight. And Shang-Chi just did that in a marvelous way, no pun intended. But it was just really engaging. All the fights were just very appropriate and moved the plot along. I was captivated.
The best action movies are the ones that are able to create character-driven action. I was really blown away by the scene between Wenwu and Jiang Li, where I keep calling it like the meet cute, where they fight each other outside Ta Lo. And I think, the MCU has been, I think, rightfully criticized for its weakness in telling romantic stories. And I like that there actually really was an essential one in this, because there's nothing worse when you try to just throw that in as like an afterthought. It just doesn't work. That scene just sold me on the relationship between those two characters so well. It reminded me of almost like a musical, which I think action and fight movies have a lot in common with musicals. Where they use scenes like that to show character and character dynamics, and you see those two dancing together, and how powerful that is as a cinematic moment. It just does so much more work than the script for a big budget blockbuster like this can really do in selling a relationship like that. So yeah, I really love this as an action film and as a martial arts film.
We call those flirt fights.
That's better. I was like, meet cute? I don't know. That doesn't really describe what happened.
It's kind of a trope.
Bernard, you actually wrote Den of Geek's reviews for Mortal Kombat and Snake Eyes and Shang-Chi. How would you stack these three movies against each other?
Man, I'm happy to say I liked all of them. I mean, it was just I was like pleasantly surprised. I honestly wasn't expecting. I don't know. I didn't know much about Mortal Kombat going in, other than like I'm a Mortal Kombat fan. It was really compelling. And Snake Eyes, same thing. I was maybe even more so not expecting Snake Eyes to be for me, but it ended up being like totally entertaining as well. Shang-Chi's the best one though. Like for me, it's at the top because of the emotional notes it hits. It's particularly for me. I do want to mention this: the story between Shang-Chi and his dad, Wen Wu. For me, and Shang-Chi, the character, is essentially Asian American, right? But when we're spending time with him in the story later on as an adult, this story resonated with me like in a pretty powerful way. I don't want to get into like details of my personal life, but like pretty much every interaction he had with his dad felt familiar in one way or another to me. And the theme of, heavy expectations for, first generation Asian American, they obviously, kind of told that story in their own way, in this like kind of fantastical MCU way, but made it no less poignant for me. I was touched by this movie in a real way. I've been waiting for this kind of story to be told on this high of a level on the big screen, and that's why, for me, Shang-Chi is at the top of the heap.
Before we go, why don't you gents tell everybody where they can find you?
Find me on Den of Geek. I love contributing to the site, and it was a pleasure for me to be on here, too. So find me on Den of Geek and find me on Twitter at BJ_Boo.
I'm on Den of Geek too, of course, and you can find me on Facebook under Gene Ching or Twitter and Gene Ching.
And everybody else, come back next week for another episode of Marvel Standom. You can find us on Twitter at Marvel Standom. You can also find us at Den of Geek US and at Den of Geek. Our web home, of course, is denofgeek.com, and you can go straight to denofgeek.com/Marvel for all of our Marvel Cinematic Universe coverage. We're on Spotify, too. We are everywhere, and we'll be back next week covering everything else the MCU multiverse has to offer. Thanks for watching.